Hey everybody, my name is Benji, and this is the first in a series of tutorials I'm calling a SimCity Guide to Custom Creations. I'm super excited to help you understand how to make custom buildings. I've been going nuts trying to figure this stuff out, reaching out to developers, and collaborating with longtime SimCity modder Oppie, and I'm finally ready to share what I've learned. In this tutorial, I plan to demystify the SimCity building material pipeline. And once you understand this stuff, we can explore some of the tools being developed to help you get your models into the game. I'd like you to check out these two resources from the official SimCity blog. They provide a sort of an insider's peek into the topics we're about to cover. So, SimCity renders its models with a specialized set of materials. For RCI buildings, these materials allow for color randomization so that single models can be used multiple times. This repurposing of models and materials also allows for more efficient use of video memory. The attributes used to assign materials to a model are called base layers and top layers. Now, a model is divided into different sections. And sections are simply selections of polygons of your model that define its unique characteristics, such as a wall, the roof, front porch, or the smokestack of a power plant. Now, each section is assigned a base layer and a top layer. And each layer is assigned a material, and each material is assigned a color. A layer may also be assigned an interior map texture. This is used to render the little rooms you see through windows we'll talk about later. A material in SimCity is a visual element that is rendered onto your model. It adds visual style and flair. Some example materials are a window frame, a door, steps, fence posts, tileable elements like wood paneling, dirt, brick, metal, etc. Now, note that some materials are what you might think of as textures, while others are the type of objects you might expect to be a part of your model's mesh. Now, I personally would think of dirt as a texture that is usually derived from a texture image that is applied to a model, while on the other hand I would think of a window frame as an object or something that is probably modeled in 3D. Well, in SimCity, both of these elements, dirt and window frame, are materials. So because of the specialized render passes contained in the materials, depending on your graphics settings, SimCity is able to render these elements with special effects that make them look a lot better than flat, two-dimensional stickers stuck onto your model. So where do the materials and colors come from? Well, the colors are retrieved from SimCity color palettes, the materials are retrieved from SimCity material sets, and the interior maps are retrieved from SimCity interior textures. First, let's talk about the SimCity material sets. At first glance, the images of a material set may look like UV maps, while in fact a material set is a collection of materials of a specific building style made up of a set of 3 images that each contain multiple textures. And that was a total mouthful, and it took me a bunch of tries to try to come up with that definition, and to me that's kind of a lot to take in. So think of it this way. A material set for a specific medium wealth, low density house, for example, would contain all of the materials that give that house its visual characteristics. The roof tiles, tiny windows, maybe a material for a garden hose that's wrapped up on the side wall. There's even a tileable white picket fence material. So in this material set, notice that each image contains the same material. So what's really going on here is that the contents contained within each image, when combined by the rendering engine, create the final material. For example, the easiest material for me to identify here is the brick material you see in the upper left. And it takes all of the textures stored within these 3 images for SimCity to render the brick texture onto a layer of a section of your model. So I'm going to cover how the textures are grouped inside of each of these images in a different tutorial, but just know that these 3 images contain all the textures needed for SimCity to render the individual materials of a specific building style. Alright, now that we got the material sets out of the way, and that's kind of the bulk of what's used to add materials to a building, let's talk about the color palettes. So a color palette is a tiny image associated with each building type or style. And there are lots of different color palettes, and there are lots of different palettes for different styles. And the color palette is used to tell SimCity what color to make each material. Now, a single color palette contains a series of columns and rows of 2x2 pixels that are shaded different colors. A layer can retrieve a color from the color palette as its permanent color, or the layer's color can be assigned to a section of the palette from which the rendering engine randomly chooses. You can see here that both the models are the same, but their materials are rendered with different colors. Notice also that all of the materials on the model are the same and that it's the color of the materials that are different. And it's easy to spot the difference in the color of the walls, but also the window frames and the doors, the rails around the porch, even the front steps are a different color. That's obviously not as effective when the same two models spawn side by side like this, but even so, this adds a lot of variation to the game, and I think it'll be a fun property to play around with on our buildings. Let's talk about the interior map textures. Windows of a building are rendered as transparent or semi-transparent. And behind windows, a special rendering technique is used to display tiny virtual rooms. Now, each little box of the interior texture is a 2D image that the game renders behind each window with parallax and dimension. So, interior map textures are a collection of interior map images that are used to render the visible rooms behind windows. You can see here the interior maps behind a set of windows. Now, there's a final asset packed up with each building model that ties the various elements we've talked about together. And that's the material info texture. The material info texture is essentially a small texture associated with each building model that encodes the material choices for that building. So my understanding is that this is simply a data file, so there is no image for me to show. This is the file that Oppie's tool or SimCity pack will need to write to translate the decisions that building creators make about where materials go and what colors are assigned to them into data that SimCity can understand. So to review, every building gets a material set, and the material set is made up of 3 images that we saw earlier. And every building gets a color palette, every building gets an interior texture map, and every building gets a material info texture. So now that we understand all the different parts of the building material pipeline, let's review. Using data from the material info texture, SimCity assigns sections of your model base layers and top layers. And each layer retrieves a material from a SimCity material set, and each material is assigned a color from a color palette. And special sections of your model, mainly the windows, are assigned an image from an interior map texture. So for example, for a wall on my model, I want the base layer to be an orange brick material, and the top layer to be a window with a red frame on it. So using the material info texture, SimCity retrieves the specified material set, and it extracts the brick textures that make up the brick material, it applies a specified color tint, in this case orange, and this is what the final base layer of my wall looks like. Now you'll see the brick textures shown here look red, green, and pink. These are just the way that each texture looks before being rendered. So to the game, the brick material is essentially colorless and waiting to be assigned a color from the color palette. Now the same process is repeated for the top layer with the window material. So SimCity extracts the window element from the material set along with a specified interior map image for use behind the window. And then it applies a color tint, and the final top layer is the finished window. Now if you look closely, you can see that the window material gets 3 colors, one for the window frame and one for the ledge, and then another color seems to be assigned to what looks like the inner window ledge, the part that recesses back into the window. If you look at the top image of the extracted window textures, you'll notice it has green, red, and blue areas. And each of these colors is essentially a placeholder for a color from the color palette. And those 3 areas were used to give this window material its 3 colors. Now I'll talk more about controlling colors in the color palette in another tutorial. Alright, that's all I've got to share in this tutorial. I hope it serves as a good overview of how the SimCity material pipeline works, and next time I'll go into more detail on the material sets. I'll cover the 6 different channels that make up a material and how each of them are rendered. Just want to give a shout out to Oppie and developers Jean-Pierre, Ryan Ingram, and Andrew Wilmot, who have showed a lot of support to the modding community, answered a lot of my questions so that I can share it with you. Now, if I were you, at this point I would probably have a few questions, and most of them having to do with how to get my fracking building into the actual game. Well, the good news is that Oppie has developed a tool for 3ds Max that, combined with SimCity Pack, can help us apply SimCity materials to our custom models and import them into the game. The bad news is that the tool is still in development, and I've got to figure out how to use it reliably enough to explain it in a tutorial. But like I said, you've really got to understand the whole SimCity material pipeline before you really would know what's going on in Oppie's tools anyway. So that's what this tutorial and at least the next one is for. That being said, nothing is stopping you guys from designing and modeling. So get started on the design process. Use the blog post mentioned earlier as a guide for constructing your models. And I really hope you come up with some awesome stuff because eventually I want to put it in my city. So get to it!